There are creators who follow time, and there are those who force time to slow down. Valentino Garavani belongs to the rare few who did not chase trends, relevance, or applause. He built something far more dangerous, far more lasting, an empire of elegance that refused to collapse, no matter how violently fashion changed around it. While seasons accelerated, while aesthetics were consumed and discarded, Valentino stood still. Not out of stubbornness, but out of certainty. He understood that true luxury does not beg for attention. It commands silence. This is not the story of a designer who succeeded. This is the story of a man who outlasted his era, because when fashion becomes noise, his work becomes clarity. When the industry forgets itself, his name reappears as a reminder of what excellence truly looks like. This video is about how Valentino Garavani built an empire the time itself could not tear down. Not with volume, not with controversy, but with discipline, beauty, and an uncompromising vision of elegance. If fashion has emperors, this is the story of the last one. Elegance in Valentino's world was never accidental. It was trained, rehearsed, demanded. Long before his name became synonymous with haute couture, Valentino understood a truth most creatives resist. Talent opens the door, but discipline decides how long you stay inside. Beauty without structure collapses. Vision without control dissolves. And so, from the very beginning, his work was built on rigor. Every line had to earn its place. Every fabric had to justify its presence. Every silhouette had to serve a purpose beyond decoration. Valentino did not believe in improvisation masked as genius. He believed in mastery, in the quiet repetition that turns instinct into precision, in the patience required to refine an idea until nothing unnecessary remains. This discipline became the backbone of his empire. While others relied on shock or novelty, Valentino relied on consistency. Season after season, he returned to the same values: harmony, balance, proportion, restraint. Not because he lacked imagination, but because he knew imagination is strongest when guided. His ateliers operated like temples of concentration. Craft was not delegated, it was protected. Seamstresses were not labor, they were guardians of knowledge. Techniques were not trends, they were inheritance. And within this controlled environment, something powerful happened. His creations gained authority. They did not ask to be admired, they expected it. Valentino's discipline also extended to what he refused to do. He did not dilute his vision to meet mass demand. He did not chase youth by imitating it. He did not surrender elegance to speed. In an industry addicted to movement, he chose stillness. In a culture obsessed with reinvention, he chose refinement. This was not resistance to change. It was resistance to erosion. Because Valentino understood that an empire does not survive by expanding endlessly. It survives by defending its core, by knowing exactly what it is, and more importantly, what it is not. That clarity became his greatest strength, and as fashion around him grew louder, faster, more disposable, his work gained weight. It felt grounded, reliable, almost inevitable. Beauty under Valentino was no longer fragile. It was fortified. Valentino never treated fashion as decoration. He treated it as language, a language with grammar, rhythm, and meaning. A language capable of expressing power without aggression, sensuality without exposure, emotion without excess. And like any true language, it demanded fluency, not noise. His silhouette spoke before the wearer ever did. There was a calm authority in his work, a confidence that did not rely on spectacle. You could recognize a Valentino from across a room, not because it shouted, but because it stood perfectly in place. Balanced, certain, complete. This was elegance as communication. Every collection refined the vocabulary. Long, fluid lines that elongated the body rather than constraining it. Colors chosen not for trend, but for resonance. And above all, an obsessive respect for proportion, the invisible structure that makes beauty feel inevitable rather than forced. Valentino understood that true elegance does not demand attention. It attracts it. Where others exaggerated, he edited. Where others provoked, he composed. His work was not about making statements. It was about establishing presence. And presence, once established, does not need to repeat itself. This is why his designs transcended seasons. They were not tied to a moment. They were tied to an idea of dignity, of grace, of beauty that does not expire. His clients did not wear Valentino to be seen. They wore Valentino to be remembered. Because when clothing becomes language, it carries memory. It attaches itself to moments of arrival, farewell, celebration, and transformation. And Valentino dressed those moments with restraint and reverence. In doing so, he elevated fashion beyond consumption. He turned it into ceremony. This was not nostalgia. It was continuity. And in an industry increasingly disconnected from meaning, Valentino's language remained intact. Clear, refined, uncompromised. Elegance for him was not a look. It was a way of speaking to the world without raising your voice. While the fashion world reinvented itself every season, Valentino made a decision that would define his legacy. He stayed consistent, not repetitive, consistent. Consistency in his hands was not limitation. It was strength. It was the discipline of returning to the same principles and discovering new depth within them. While others chased relevance through change, Valentino achieved relevance through continuity. He understood something essential. Identity is not built by constant transformation, but by clear intention sustained over time. Season after season, his collection spoke the same language, refined rather than rewritten. The silhouettes evolved, but the soul remained untouched. The palette shifted, but the emotion stayed intact. The craftsmanship advanced, but the values never blurred. This consistency created trust. Clients knew what Valentino stood for. Editors recognized his signature without needing labels. The industry learned to measure elegance against his work, not the other way around. In a system addicted to novelty, this was radical. Valentino did not confuse innovation with disruption. He believed innovation could be quiet, internal, almost invisible. A millimeter changed here, a line softened there, a proportion perfected just enough to feel right without calling attention to itself. That kind of innovation does not go viral, but it endures. His consistency also acted as a filter. Trends passed through his world only if they aligned with his philosophy. Anything that threatened balance, restraint, or dignity was simply excluded. This selective discipline protected the brand from dilution. As a result, Valentino became something rare, a house that did not age with fashion cycles, but outlived them. While trends rose and collapsed, his work accumulated value, like architecture, like art, like culture. Consistency gave his empire gravity, and gravity attracts everything around it. By refusing to abandon his core, Valentino created a body of work that feels unified rather than fragmented. A legacy that can be read as a single, uninterrupted statement of belief. In fashion, where identity is often sacrificed for attention, Valentino proved that staying true is not a weakness, it is a strategy. There are colors that decorate, and then there are colors that define. Valentino Red was never just a shade, it was a declaration, a visual signature so precise, so emotionally charged, that it transcended fashion and entered cultural memory. This red did not scream. It commanded. Deep, saturated, and unmistakably alive, Valentino Red carried contradiction within it. Power without aggression, sensuality without excess, romance without fragility. It was bold, yet disciplined, emotional, yet controlled. Valentino understood color as psychology. In a world of neutrals and seasonal palettes, he chose permanence. He returned to this red not because it was safe, but because it was truthful. It reflected his vision of beauty as something intense yet composed, dramatic yet refined, and repetition gave it authority. Over time, Valentino Red stopped being a color choice and became an identity marker. One glance was enough. No logo required, no explanation needed. The red spoke. It dressed women at moments of arrival, at entrances that demanded presence, at scenes where confidence had to be felt before a word was spoken. Unlike trend-driven colors, this red did not belong to a year or a collection. It belonged to Valentino. And in fashion, that level of ownership is rare. The brilliance of Valentino Red was not in its visibility, but in its consistency. It appeared across silhouettes, decades, and contexts, reinforcing the idea that elegance does not need reinvention when it is already complete. Color, in his hands, became architecture, a structural element, not a decorative afterthought. Through this red, Valentino achieved what many brands attempt but few accomplish: emotional recognition. The ability to trigger memory, desire, and respect through a single visual cue. This was branding without marketing, identity without noise. And as trends faded, Valentino Red remained, unaltered, uncompromised. A reminder that when a creator believes deeply enough in one idea, it can become eternal. True luxury is not excess, it is independence. Valentino never designed to please a system. He designed to honor a conviction. And in doing so, he embraced a form of luxury that few could afford, the luxury of following no one. While the industry chased youth, speed, and constant reinvention, Valentino chose authority. He did not react to trends. He observed them from a distance, filtering what mattered and discarding what didn't. His work was never a response. It was a position. This refusal to follow created separation. Valentino's collections existed on their own timeline. They were not rushed by calendars or distorted by external pressure. They arrived when they were ready, complete, resolved, confident. In a culture driven by immediacy, that patience became power. He understood that originality does not come from opposition. It comes from clarity. By staying rooted in his own aesthetic language, Valentino avoided the exhaustion that comes from constant adaptation. His designs did not age because they were never trying to be young. They were trying to be right. This independence also protected his house from confusion. While other brands shifted identities with each creative direction, Valentino remained unmistakable. The message was stable. The codes were intact. The voice never wavered. Luxury, in this sense, became restraint. The courage to say no. The confidence to wait. The discipline to remain unchanged when change offers applause. Valentino proved that relevance is not earned by imitation, but by coherence. By refusing to dilute his vision, he allowed it to mature, deepen, and solidify. And as fashion accelerated around him, his work slowed the eye. It demanded attention not through shock, but through presence. That is the paradox of true luxury. The less it tries to be seen, the more impossible it is to ignore. Valentino did not follow the world. He let the world circle around him. When Valentino chose to step away, it was not an escape. It was a final act of authorship. In an industry where creators often fade slowly or are pushed aside, his departure was deliberate, composed, and unmistakably his own. He did not leave because the world no longer wanted him. He left because he had already said everything he needed to say. And that decision spoke louder than any collection. Valentino understood that legacy is not only built by what you create, but by how you choose to stop. Staying too long can weaken even the strongest vision. He refused that erosion. He protected the integrity of his work by knowing when completion had been reached. This was control at its highest level. There was no desperation in his exit, no attempt to cling to relevance, no need for reinvention. He stepped away at the height of recognition, leaving behind a body of work that felt finished, resolved, and whole. In doing so, he turned absence into presence, because once he was gone, the weight of what he had built became undeniable. Every comparison led back to him. Every attempt to define elegance echoed his standards. His influence did not diminish, it intensified. The fashion world suddenly realized something uncomfortable. Valentino was not part of the system. He was a reference point within it. His exit revealed the depth of his authority. It showed how rare it is for a creator to leave without fracture, without compromise, without dilution. The house continued. The industry moved on. But the measure remained. This was not retirement. It was canonization. By stepping away on his own terms, Valentino ensured that his work would never be rewritten by decline. It would be remembered in its purest form, untouched by exhaustion or concession. Few creators are disciplined enough to know when silence becomes more powerful than production. Valentino was, and in that silence, his voice became permanent. When a creator of Valentino's magnitude steps away, he does not leave a void. He leaves a shadow, not a burden, but a standard. After his departure, the House of Valentino continued to evolve, guided by new creative hands and contemporary visions. Yet from the very first moment, one truth was unavoidable. No one was there to replace him. They were there to work in dialogue with what he had built. Valentino's legacy was never a formula to replicate. It was a philosophy to respect. Every new collection, every reinterpretation, every modern gesture existed in conversation with his original codes. Proportion, discipline, romance controlled by structure, emotion filtered through elegance. These were not optional references. They were the foundation. The shadow he left behind did not restrict creativity. It elevated it. Because when a house is born from such clarity, it demands responsibility from those who inherit it. You cannot design carelessly under that name. You cannot be loud without reason. You cannot confuse attention with authority. Valentino's absence forced the brand to confront its essence. What remains when the founder is no longer present is not fabric or archives. It is identity. And in Valentino's case, that identity was so precisely constructed that it continued to guide decisions without his physical presence. This is the rarest form of legacy, a house that remembers not just how its creator designed, but why. As fashion around it accelerated, the Valentino name continued to slow the conversation, to remind the industry that elegance is not negotiable, that luxury demands coherence, that heritage is not nostalgia, but continuity. The shadow of Valentino is not something to escape, it is something to honor, because only creators who build with integrity leave behind a presence strong enough to guide the future without speaking. And in that quiet guidance, the House of Valentino continues not as an imitation, but as an extension of a vision that never depended on trend. The shadow remains, not to dominate, but to define. When a creator of this scale steps back, what follows is not emptiness, it is silence with weight. Valentino's farewell was not dramatic. There was no rupture, no spectacle, no final provocation. It was a conscious withdrawal, almost ceremonial, as if he understood that his work no longer needed his presence to speak for it. And that silence spoke louder than any runway, because once he was gone, a question lingered in the air. Who can occupy the space of someone who never competed with anyone? Valentino did not leave behind a method to copy. He left behind an ethic, a way of understanding fashion as cultural responsibility rather than commercial urgency, as legacy rather than entertainment. After his departure, the industry did not lose a designer. It lost a measure. Every discussion about elegance, restraint, and craftsmanship suddenly pointed back to him, not out of nostalgia, but out of necessity. His work became the reference through which everything else was evaluated. And paradoxically, in silence, Valentino became more present. Archives were revisited with renewed respect. Silhouettes once considered classic were now seen as timeless. Codes he had established decades earlier resurfaced in contemporary conversation, not as revival, but as relevance. Because when an empire is built without betraying its essence, it does not disappear when its founder leaves. It permeates everything that follows. The silence after Valentino was not absence, it was consecration. A silence that demands no explanation. A silence that does not ask for attention, yet receives it. A silence filled with authority. Far from the lights, far from the applause, his influence continued to move quietly through the industry. Discreet, inescapable, persistent. This is how true masters remain present, not by speaking, but by having already said everything that mattered. There are creators who age with their era, and then there are those who force time to pause in front of their work. Valentino belongs to the second. While fashion accelerated into cycles of immediacy and excess, his creations remained untouched by urgency. Not frozen, but resolved. Not nostalgic, but complete. Time did not move past Valentino because there was nothing to correct. Trends attempted to challenge him. Systems tried to pull him into constant renewal. But Valentino never negotiated with the temporary. He understood that modernity is not speed, it is clarity, and clarity does not expire. Even now, as decades compress into moments, his name continues to function as a standard rather than a reference. Not something to look back on, but something to measure against. When studying modern fashion history, Valentino does not appear as a chapter. He appears as a point of balance, a place where technique meets emotion, where beauty is not decorative, but intentional. His garments were never designed for a season. They were designed for a moment in someone's life that would never repeat. An arrival, a farewell, a transformation, a memory sealed in fabric. That is why his legacy does not depend on his presence. When creation becomes ritual, it escapes its creator and enters culture. Valentino understood that luxury is not accumulation, it is meaning. While many houses chased relevance, he built continuity. While others altered identity to survive, he survived by never altering his own. In the end, time did not defeat Valentino because he never fought it. He ignored it. And that indifference became power. Today, his name requires no explanation. It activates shared values instantly. Elegance, restraint, emotion, discipline. A common language across generations that disagree on everything except this. Valentino did not conquer time by resisting it. He did so by creating something time could not argue with. Some names need to be explained. Others simply stand. Valentino is one of them. When the lights finally dim and the noise of the present fades, what remains is the naked truth of a body of work. And in that final stillness, Valentino's legacy does not ask to be protected. It does not need justification. It asserts itself. Because he was never just a designer. He was a builder of meaning, someone who understood that fashion could be language, refuge, and ceremony all at once. That a garment could hold memory, dignity, and emotion. That luxury, when done honestly, does not separate people. It elevates them. His legacy does not live only in archives, museums, or runways. It lives in how the world learned to recognize elegance, in the idea that beauty can be powerful without aggression, that femininity can be strong without abandoning grace. That sophistication does not need permission. Valentino did not change fashion by declaring revolution. He changed it by practicing coherence, by remaining faithful when betrayal was easier, by choosing excellence when speed was rewarded, by building an empire without sacrificing its soul. That is why, today, even after his definitive farewell, his name does not evoke the past. It evokes a standard. For new generations, Valentino is not something old. He is something aspirational, a compass in an industry saturated with noise, a reminder that impact is not measured in clicks, but in permanence. His work did not age. It settled, layer by layer, collection by collection, until it formed a foundation so solid it no longer depends on context, explanation, or trend. It simply exists, clear, firm, non-negotiable. Perhaps that is his greatest achievement, proving that luxury can have principles, that elegance can be consistent, that beauty can carry ethics. When everything passes, when everything is consumed, when everything is replaced, some names remain, not because they resist time, but because they transcend it. Valentino did not leave an absence, he left an altitude, and from that height, his legacy will continue to observe the fashion world. Not to compete with it, but to remind it how far it can go when it chooses to do things right. Not every ending closes a story. Some endings lift it higher. Valentino never asked to be remembered. He built something so precise, so coherent, that remembrance became inevitable. His name no longer requires context, because his work taught the world how to look, how to wait, how to distinguish. In a world that rushes forward, his legacy asks us to slow down, to understand that elegance is not a trend, but a decision, that true luxury does not seek instant approval, but permanence, and that beauty, when built on principle, does not age. It asserts itself. Today, when the name Valentino is spoken, it is never just about garments. It speaks of a creative ethic, of a way of working that demands respect for craft, for history, and for the person who wears the creation. It speaks of a standard that cannot be copied, only honored. That is the destiny of great cultural empires, to outgrow their creator and become a measure, a reference, a starting point for those who understand that to create is also to assume responsibility. Valentino is no longer on the runway, but the runway still measures itself by the distance he left behind. And as long as there are those who believe beauty deserves time, rigor, and soul, his name will remain alive. Not as an echo of the past, but as a requirement for the future. Because some legacies do not fade, they rise. And from that height, they continue to guide, without speaking, without insisting, without needing to return.